The cardboard beneath my back had grown soft from 3 months of body heat and the occasional leak from the Honda's sunroof. I pressed my palm against the car window, watching the condensation from my breath fog the glass in small, perfect circles. Outside, the street light cast long shadows across the empty parking lot behind the defunct grocery store where I'd been sleeping since October. My daughter Jennifer's voice still echoed in my head from our last phone call. "Just sleep in your car a little longer, Mom. I'm busy with the baby coming and all. You understand, right?" I understood more than she knew. The flood had taken everything. My little house on Maple Street, my photographs, my mother's china, 40 years of carefully collected memories. Insurance covered the structure, but not the life inside it. At 62, I found myself with nothing but a 12-year-old Honda Civic and the clothes I'd managed to salvage from the muddy wreckage. Jennifer had seemed sympathetic at first. "Of course, you can stay with us temporarily, Mom. Just until you get back on your feet." But temporary had stretched into uncomfortable, and uncomfortable had become impossible when her husband Michael started leaving passive-aggressive notes about utility bills and grocery costs taped to the refrigerator. The morning I'd finally packed my few belongings back into the Honda, Jennifer had been feeding 18-month-old Patricia breakfast. She'd barely looked up from the high chair as I explained I'd be staying elsewhere for a while. "That's probably for the best," she'd said, wiping mashed banana from Patricia's chin. "Michael's been stressed about the promotion at work, and you know how he gets when he's stressed." I knew exactly how Michael got when he was stressed. He got mean. He got entitled. He got comfortable treating me like an unwelcome guest in what had been my temporary home. Now lying in the back seat of my car with a winter coat serving as my blanket, I wondered if this was what my mother had felt like in her final years. Invisible, inconvenient, easily discarded when love became too much work. My phone buzzed against my chest. A text from Jennifer. "Hope you're doing okay. Michael got the promotion. We're looking at bigger houses now. Baby number 2 is due in spring." I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then set the phone aside without responding. She hoped I was doing okay. She hoped I was doing okay while sleeping in a car in December in Ohio while she celebrated promotions and house hunting and expanding families. The next morning, I drove to the public library as I did every day, parking in the same spot near the back entrance. The librarian, a kind woman named Mary, had stopped asking questions about my daily routine weeks ago. She simply nodded when I passed the circulation desk, heading for the computer terminals where I spent hours applying for jobs, researching assistance programs, and slowly rebuilding what the flood had destroyed. It was there, on a Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday, that I saw the email that would change everything. "Dear Patricia Blackwood," it began, and I had to read the sender's name twice before I believed it. "Harrison and Associates, Estate Attorneys." My heart hammered as I scrolled down. "We represent the estate of your late aunt, Robert's widow. We have been attempting to locate you regarding a bequest in her will. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the inheritance she has left you." I sat frozen in the hard plastic chair, reading the email again and again. Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, the one who'd moved to California in the 1980s and gradually faded from family gatherings and Christmas cards. I'd assumed she died years ago, lost to the natural drift of extended family relationships, but she remembered me. The phone call to the attorney's office felt surreal. Yes, they confirmed. Margaret had left her entire estate to me, a house in Pasadena, California. Investment accounts, life insurance. The lawyer's voice was professional, almost bored, as he recited numbers that made my hands shake. "The property is worth approximately $850,000, he said. "The liquid assets total another $320,000. There are some debts to settle, but you're looking at inheriting well over $1 million, Ms. Blackwood." I ended the call and sat in stunned silence. Around me, the library hummed with its usual afternoon activity. Students typing papers, retirees reading newspapers, children giggling in the story corner. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the homeless woman in the corner computer terminal had just inherited a fortune. The drive back to my parking lot felt dreamlike. I kept expecting to wake up in the Honda's back seat to discover this was just another desperate fantasy born of exhaustion and cold. But the lawyer's business card was real in my pocket, and the follow-up email was real in my phone. I thought about calling Jennifer immediately, sharing the news, watching her face transform from distant politeness to excited interest, but something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of Michael's notes about utility bills. Maybe it was the casual way she dismissed my homelessness as a temporary inconvenience. Or maybe it was the small hard seed of anger that had been growing in my chest for months, fed by every night I'd spent sleeping in a car while my daughter slept in her warm bed, planning her expanding family. Instead, I drove to a motel, a real bed for the first time in months. I paid cash for 3 nights and took the longest, hottest shower of my life. In the mirror, I looked at a woman I barely recognized, thinner than I'd been in years, with hollow cheeks and eyes that had learned to expect disappointment. But something else was there, too. Something I hadn't seen in months. A spark of possibility. A hint of the woman I'd been before Michael's notes and Jennifer's convenient, busy schedule had worn me down to nothing. I spent the evening on the motel's Wi-Fi researching Pasadena real estate, looking at pictures of the house that was now mine. A craftsman bungalow with a front porch and mature orange trees in the backyard. It needed work, the listing photos showed, but it was beautiful. It was home. My phone buzzed. Another text from Jennifer. Haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything okay? I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Part of me wanted to share the news to let her know her mother wasn't as helpless as she'd assumed, but a larger part wanted to wait to see what else might reveal itself in the coming days. I'm fine, I finally typed back, just figuring some things out. The next morning, I made the arrangements to fly to California. The lawyer would meet me at the property, help me understand the full scope of what Margaret had left behind. I bought a plane ticket with money I'd been saving for a security deposit on an apartment. Money I'd been hoarding like a dragon guard's gold. As I packed my few belongings, everything I owned still fit in 2 grocery bags. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 months ago. The woman who'd lost everything to flood water and had accepted her daughter's grudging charity because she believed she had no other choice. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder. Someone who'd learned that love could be conditional and family could be temporary. Someone who discovered that the people who claimed to care about you most could also be the ones most willing to abandon you when caring became inconvenient. I left the motel key on the nightstand and walked out into the December morning. The Honda started on the first try as if it knew we were finally going somewhere better. But I didn't drive to the airport immediately. Instead, I took a detour past Jennifer's house, a modest colonial in a decent neighborhood with Michael's truck in the driveway and children's toys scattered across the front lawn. The house where I'd been tolerated for 6 weeks before being gently, politely, efficiently pushed out. I sat in my car across the street, engine running, watching the windows for signs of life. A part of me wanted to knock on the door, to tell Jennifer about the inheritance, to see if wealth might restore the daughter who'd once called me every Sunday just to talk. But I'd learned something in these months of sleeping in parking lots and spending days in libraries. I'd learned that dignity, once lost, wasn't easily recovered. And I'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who do it with smiles and excuses and the careful language of love. I put the car in drive and headed for the airport. Behind me, Jennifer's house grew smaller in the rear-view mirror. Ahead of me, California waited, and with it, the chance to discover who I might become when I no longer had to be grateful for scraps of affection from people who saw me as a burden. The transformation had already begun. I could feel it in the way I held my shoulders, in the steadiness of my hands on the steering wheel. I was no longer the woman who'd accepted sleeping in a car because her daughter was too busy to care. The California sun felt like forgiveness against my face as I stepped off the plane at LAX. For 3 months, I'd lived under Ohio's gray winter sky, sleeping in the shadow of abandoned buildings and strip malls. Here, even in December, the air carried warmth and the promise of new beginnings. Harrison and Associates had arranged for a car service to take me directly to the property. The driver, a weathered man named James, spoke with the easy familiarity of someone who'd lived in Los Angeles his entire life. "First time in California?" he asked, navigating the freeway with practiced ease. "First time in 40 years, I replied, watching palm trees flash past the window like exclamation points against the blue sky. "What brings you back?" "An inheritance. From an aunt I barely knew." James's eyes found mine in the rear-view mirror. "Funny how family works sometimes. The ones you think you can count on disappoint you. And the ones you forget about save your life." I thought about Jennifer's text messages. Cheerful updates about nursery shopping and mortgage pre-approval sent to a woman sleeping in a car. "Yes," I said quietly. "Funny how that works." The house on Craftsman Avenue exceeded the photographs. A 1920s bungalow with original hardwood floors and built-in bookcases. It sat on a corner lot shaded by ancient oak trees. The front porch wrapped around 2 sides of the house. And despite needing paint and some obvious repairs, it had the solid bones of a home built to last. Attorney Robert Harrison met me at the front gate, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked genuinely surprised when I climbed out of the car service rather than a luxury vehicle. "Miss Blackwood." I was expecting, well, someone different. I looked down at my worn jeans and thrift store sweater, the nicest clothes I owned. "Different how?" "Your aunt spoke of you often in her final years. She made it sound like you were quite successful, established." I assumed. He trailed off, perhaps noticing the way I gripped the gate for support as I looked at the house that was now mine. "My aunt was remembering me from 40 years ago," I said. "People change. Circumstances change." Inside, the house told the story of a woman who'd lived alone, but not lonely. Every room was filled with books, plants, and carefully chosen antiques. The kitchen had been updated sometime in the 1990s, and while dated, everything was clean and functional. Aunt Margaret had left behind not just a house, but a complete life. "The neighbors have been maintaining the yard and collecting mail," Mr. Harrison explained as we walked through rooms that smelled of lavender and old books. "Mrs. Davis next door has a key. She's been quite concerned about what would happen to the place." In the master bedroom, I found photographs on the dresser. Margaret as a young woman, then middle-aged, then elderly, but always smiling. In several pictures, she wasn't alone. A tall woman with silver hair appeared in photos spanning decades. Companions at dinner tables, on vacation, gardening together in what I recognized as this very backyard. "Was my aunt married?" I asked. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "She shared her life with someone." "Yes, Elena Rodriguez. They were together for 37 years before Elena passed 2 years ago. Your aunt never quite recovered from that loss." I picked up a photograph of the 2 women, both in their 70s, hands intertwined as they sat on this same front porch. The love between them was visible even in a still image. The way Margaret leaned into Elena. The way Elena's thumb traced circles on Margaret's knuckles. Did Elena have family? A son in Oregon who never visited. He contested the will when Elena left everything to your aunt. Quite bitter about it, according to Margaret. I understood then why Margaret had chosen me. Not because we'd been close, but because we'd both learned that family wasn't always about blood, and that love given freely was rarer than love expected by right. The paperwork took hours. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, insurance policies, a paper trail of a life carefully planned and responsibly managed. Margaret had been a retired teacher who'd invested wisely and lived modestly. She'd owned this house outright for 15 years. The liquid assets total $347,000 after taxes and fees, Mr. Harrison explained. The house is valued at $865,000, though in this market it could sell for considerably more. Your aunt also maintained a small life insurance policy that brings the total inheritance to just over $1.2 million. The numbers felt abstract, like prices for items in a store I'd never imagined shopping in. But what felt real was the house around me, the weight of keys in my palm, the knowledge that I had a home again. After Mr. Harrison left, I walked through the rooms again, this time alone. In the kitchen, I found a note taped to the refrigerator in careful handwriting. For the neighbor who feeds the plants and collects my mail, there's wine in the pantry and cookies in the blue tin. Help yourself, M. I knocked on the door of the house next door. A woman in her 70s answered, her face lighting up when I introduced myself. You're Margaret's niece. Oh, honey. She talked about you constantly. Patricia this, Patricia that. She was so proud of you. The woman, Carol Davis, ushered me inside for coffee and what turned out to be 3 hours of stories about my aunt. She worried about you, especially this past year, Carol said. She had a feeling you were going through something difficult. She wanted to reach out but didn't want to intrude. Patricia is strong, she'd say. But everyone needs help sometimes. I thought about the months I'd spent sleeping in my car, the careful rationing of every dollar, the slow erosion of dignity that comes with having nowhere to go. Margaret had somehow sensed my struggle from 2,000 miles away, while my own daughter, living 30 minutes from me, had seen it as an inconvenience to her expanding lifestyle. She changed her will 6 months ago, Carol continued, added a provision that if anything happened to her, should watch for you. She said, you might not know about the inheritance right away, and you might need extra kindness when you arrived. But the real shock came later that evening. As I was going through Margaret's papers, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside, a letter in Margaret's careful handwriting that made my blood run cold. My dear Patricia, it began. If you're reading this, then you've inherited more than just my house and savings. You've inherited a terrible secret that I've carried for 40 years. Your daughter Jennifer's real father isn't who she thinks it is. When your sister Sarah was married to Thomas, she had an affair with my husband Charles. Jennifer was born from that affair. Sarah made me promise never to tell, but after Charles died, I couldn't bear keeping this from the family. Jennifer is actually your niece, not your daughter. The man you raised her with, David, never knew. I'm sorry to burden you with this knowledge, but I felt you deserved to know why Jennifer has always felt so distant from you. She carries Charles's genes, his selfishness, his capacity for cruelty. I've watched from afar as she's treated you the same way Charles treated everyone who wasn't useful to him. Use this knowledge as you see fit. You owe her nothing. Love, Margaret. My hands shook as I set the letter down. Everything suddenly made sense. Jennifer's cold calculation, her ability to discard me when I became inconvenient, the way she'd always seemed just slightly out of reach emotionally. She wasn't my daughter. She was the child of a man I'd never met, raised by a sister who'd lied to everyone, including me. The phone rang, startling me from my shock. Jennifer's number. Mom, finally, I was starting to worry. Where are you? California, I said simply, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. California. What are you doing there? Did you find a job? Something like that. I inherited a house. Silence then. What do you mean inherited? My Aunt Margaret died. She left me her house and some money. Aunt Margaret? I thought she died years ago. How much money? There it was. Not I'm so sorry for your loss. Or how wonderful that you have a home again. Just how much money? The greed in her voice hit differently now that I knew she wasn't my blood, wasn't the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for. Enough, I said. Well, that's fantastic news. Michael and I were just talking about how we could help you get back on your feet. This solves everything. When are you coming home? Home. As if the car I'd been sleeping in for 3 months was home. As if the parking lot behind a defunct grocery store was where I belonged. I'm not sure I am coming home, Jennifer. Another pause. What do you mean? Your life is here. Patricia misses her grandmother. And with the new baby coming, you could help us so much. You seem to manage just fine with me sleeping in my car for 3 months. Mom, that's not fair. We offered to let you stay with us. For 6 weeks until Michael got tired of seeing me. That's not look, maybe we didn't handle things perfectly, but we're family. This inheritance is wonderful, but you don't need to run away to California. We can help you find a nice place here close to us. Close to them. Close enough to be convenient when they needed babysitting or help with household projects, but not so close as to be a daily reminder of their capacity for callousness. But now I knew the truth. We weren't family. Not really. Jennifer was the daughter of a man who'd destroyed lives with his selfishness, raised by a sister who'd built her marriage on lies. I need to think about things, I said. Think about what? Mom, you're not making sense. Come home. We'll figure this out together. But as I looked out at the garden Margaret and Elena had planted together, at the neighborhood where people left notes for each other and watched over empty houses, I realized I might already be home. I'll call you in a few days, I said and hung up before Jennifer could respond. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months. Margaret's bed in Margaret's house, surrounded by the accumulated comfort of a life well lived. The sheets smelled like lavender, and through the open window, I could hear the gentle rustle of orange trees in the backyard. But sleep didn't come easily. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Jennifer, each one more urgent than the last. Mom, call me back. We need to talk about this properly. Michael thinks you're not thinking clearly. Michael thinks. Of course, Michael had an opinion about my inheritance, about my choices, about my life. Michael, who'd left notes about utility bills when I was homeless. Michael, who was now, according to Jennifer's earlier texts, looking at bigger houses and planning bigger families. I turned off my phone and lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my new neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the night. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights briefly illuminating the bedroom walls. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of building a new life. Tomorrow, I would decide who deserved to be part of it. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was warm, safe, and sleeping in a place that belonged to me. Tonight, I was no longer the woman who'd accepted sleeping in a car because the girl she'd raised was too busy to care. 3 weeks in California had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. My skin had lost the gray pallor of Ohio winter and homeless nights. My shoulders no longer carried the permanent hunch of someone expecting disappointment. When I caught my reflection in Margaret's antique mirrors, I saw glimpses of the woman I'd been before the flood, before Michael's passive-aggressive notes, before I'd learned to make myself small enough to fit into other people's definition of convenient. I'd started each morning with coffee on the front porch, watching Carol Davis tend her garden next door. She'd wave and call out updates about neighborhood happenings, the Rodriguez's new baby, the Thompsons' kitchen renovation, the book club that met every Thursday at the community center. Ordinary life, the kind I'd forgotten existed during my months of survival mode. The house itself was becoming mine through small daily choices. I'd moved Margaret's collection of mystery novels to make room for the few books I'd salvaged from the flood. I'd rearranged the kitchen to suit my left-handed cooking style. Most significantly, I'd hung my mother's quilt, the only piece of family history I'd managed to save, on the living room wall, where afternoon light would catch its faded colors. My phone had been mercifully quiet for days after I'd stopped responding to Jennifer's increasingly frantic messages. But this morning, as I sat with my coffee watching Carol deadhead her roses, it rang with Jennifer's number. "Mom, thank God. I've been worried sick." "I'm fine, Jennifer. Just settling in." "Settling in? What do you mean settling in? You can't just disappear to California and expect us not to worry. Patricia keeps asking where Grandma went." The mention of Patricia sent a familiar pang through my chest. The little girl I'd thought was my granddaughter, her sweet face, her delight in simple games and bedtime stories. But even that love had been filtered through Jennifer's convenience, visits scheduled around her social calendar, interactions monitored for signs that I might be staying too long or expecting too much. "How is Patricia?" I asked. "She's fine, but that's not the point. The point is you running away instead of dealing with reality. Michael and I have been talking, and we think you should come home immediately. This whole California thing is just escapism. Michael and I have been talking as if Michael's opinion about my life mattered. As if the man who'd made me feel unwelcome in Jennifer's home had any right to judge my choices. But now I knew why Jennifer was so quick to side with Michael against me. She carried the genes of a man who'd destroyed families, who'd put his own desires above everyone else's well-being. What reality am I avoiding exactly? You can't just play house in some dead woman's home and pretend your real life doesn't exist. You have responsibilities here. Family here. I had no family when I was sleeping in my car. Oh, don't be so dramatic. That was temporary. We were figuring things out. For 3 months, Jennifer. I was homeless for 3 months while you figured things out. And now you're not. Problem solved. So sell the house, take the money, and come home where you belong. Where I belong. In Jennifer's world, I belonged wherever was most convenient for her. Close enough to provide free babysitting and holiday help. Distant enough not to interfere with her real life. But she wasn't my daughter. She was the child of a stranger, a man whose selfishness had poisoned 2 generations. "I like it here," I said simply. "You don't even know anyone there." "I'm getting to know people. The neighbors are lovely." "Neighbors aren't family, Mom." "No," I said, thinking of Carol's daily waves. Of the woman at the hardware store who'd spent an hour helping me choose the right paint for the front porch. Of the book club members who'd already invited me to join them. Sometimes they're better. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Jennifer spoke, her voice tight with frustration. "Fine. You want to have your little adventure, go ahead. But don't expect us to keep your life on hold indefinitely. Michael got the promotion, remember? We're looking at houses. Real houses, not some old lady's leftover life." "Congratulations on Michael's promotion," I said, meaning it less than she probably thought. "We're actually flying out there next weekend." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. "What?" "We found tickets on sale. Michael has some vacation days to use up before the end of the year. We thought we'd come see this famous house. Help you get your head on straight. Maybe look at the real estate market while we're there. Help me get my head on straight." As if moving from homelessness to home ownership represented confused thinking rather than miraculous good fortune. As if discovering that the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for wasn't actually my daughter was something that needed correcting. "I don't think that's a good idea, Jennifer." "Why not?" "We're family. We want to see where you're living. Make sure you're safe. And frankly, Mom, some of the things you've been saying lately worry us. This whole cutting off contact thing isn't like you. It wasn't like the old me." She was right about that. The old me would have been grateful for any attention, any suggestion that I mattered enough to worry about. The old me would have spent the week cleaning frantically and shopping for groceries I couldn't afford to make sure Jennifer and Michael felt welcomed and comfortable. But the old me had thought Jennifer was my daughter. The old me had believed family bonds meant something beyond genetic accident. "When are you arriving?" I asked. "Saturday afternoon. We'll get a hotel near you. Somewhere nice. Michael found this great place that's not too expensive if we use his work discount." Of course, they'd stay in a hotel. Not because my house wasn't big enough. Margaret's guest room was lovely. But because staying with me would require acknowledging that this was actually my home, not just a temporary delusion they needed to cure me of. "I'll pick you up at the airport," I heard myself say. "Perfect. Oh, Mom, you'll see. Once you spend some time with us, remember what you're missing. You'll realize this whole California thing is just grief talking. Grief makes people do strange things." After I hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching Carol work in her garden. Eventually, she noticed my stillness and came over to the low fence that separated our yards. "Everything all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." "My daughter's coming to visit." Carol's face brightened. "How wonderful. You must be excited." "I should be. But you're not." I found myself telling Carol about the phone call, about Jennifer's assumption that I was having some kind of breakdown that needed correcting, about Michael's opinions and their plans to help me get my head on straight. But I didn't tell her about Margaret's letter, about the bombshell that had exploded my understanding of family. That secret felt too raw, too dangerous to share. Carol listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding in understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, pruning shears idle in her hands. "You know," she said finally, "Margaret went through something similar when she first moved here. Her sister, your mother, I suppose, came to visit about 6 months after Margaret and Elena bought this house. Came with her husband and a whole lot of opinions about Margaret's lifestyle choices." I'd never heard this story. "What happened?" "Oh, they had quite the visit. Lots of suggestions about how Margaret should live, who she should be. They stayed 3 days and spent most of it trying to convince her to move back to Ohio, find a nice man, live a normal life." Carol snipped a dead rose with more force than necessary. "Margaret told me afterward that she learned something important that week." "What?" "That love doesn't try to change you back into who you used to be. Real love celebrates who you're becoming." That afternoon, I drove to a hardware store in a neighboring town, one where nobody knew me yet. I bought new locks for the front and back doors, good ones, the kind that couldn't be easily bypassed. The elderly man behind the counter, Tom Williams, helped me choose the right tools and gave me detailed instructions for installation. "Changing locks is one of the most empowering things a woman can do," he said as he rang up my purchase. "Makes a house truly yours." I spent the evening installing the new locks, working slowly and carefully with Margaret's toolbox and Tom's instructions. It was satisfying work, requiring focus and precision that left no room for anxiety about the coming weekend. When I finished, I stood in the entryway, turning my new keys in their new locks, listening to the solid click of tumblers falling into place. Saturday morning, I woke early and spent extra time getting ready. I chose my outfit carefully. A blue dress I'd bought the week before. The first new clothing I'd purchased in months. It fit well and made me look competent, settled, like a woman who belonged in her own home. The airport was chaos. Holiday travelers and delayed flights creating an atmosphere of barely controlled stress. I found Jennifer and Michael at baggage claim, both looking tired and irritated from their journey. Jennifer hugged me briefly, then stepped back to study my face with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for suspicious packages. "You look different," she said. "I look rested." Michael gave me a perfunctory hug and immediately began complaining about the flight, the airport, the California traffic he'd heard horror stories about. I listened politely as I led them to my car, not the old Honda, which I'd traded for a reliable used Prius the week before. "Nice car," Michael said with surprise. "The inheritance must have been bigger than you told Jennifer." It was a casual comment, but it revealed everything. They weren't here out of concern for my well-being. They were here to assess my assets, to understand exactly what I'd inherited and how it might benefit them. They had no idea that their entire foundation for making claims on my affection had crumbled the moment I read Margaret's letter. "Big enough," I said, echoing my previous non-answer to Jennifer. During the drive to their hotel, Jennifer kept up a steady stream of chatter about their house hunt, Michael's promotion, their expanding family plans. It was clear they'd rehearsed this presentation designed to remind me of everything I was missing by staying in California. "We found this amazing house," Jennifer said. "4 bedrooms, perfect for our growing family. The only problem is it's a bit of a stretch financially, even with Michael's raise. We're thinking about asking family for help with the down payment." There it was, the real reason for their visit, delivered with the practiced casualness of people who'd learned to wrap requests for money in concern about family obligations. But they weren't my family. Jennifer was the daughter of a man who'd betrayed his wife and destroyed lives for his own pleasure. Every kindness I'd ever shown her, every sacrifice I'd made, had been based on a lie. I pulled into the hotel parking lot and helped them with their luggage, agreeing to pick them up for dinner in 2 hours. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them in my rear-view mirror, standing close together on the sidewalk, clearly discussing strategy for the evening ahead. But I had strategies of my own now. I was no longer the desperate woman who'd been grateful for 6 weeks of grudging shelter. I was someone with a home, with choices, with the power to say no. And I was someone who now knew that the person asking for my help had no legitimate claim on my love. Dinner at Pasadena's finest restaurant had been Michael's suggestion, a place expensive enough to demonstrate that they weren't struggling financially, just strategically seeking help with their investment in a forever home. Jennifer had worn her newest dress, and Michael had spent the first 20 minutes discussing his promotion in terms that suggested he was practically running the company now. I'd listened politely, making appropriate sounds of congratulation while watching them perform their careful choreography of success. They were good at it, I had to admit. The perfect young couple with expanding dreams that just needed a little family support to become reality. But I wasn't family. I was the woman who'd been tricked into raising another woman's child, and that child had grown up to be exactly like her real father. "The house we're looking at is really an investment," Michael explained as he cut his steak with surgical precision. "Property values in that neighborhood have increased 30% in the last 5 years. With the new baby coming, we need the space, but we're also thinking long-term, building wealth for the family." "It sounds wonderful," I said. Jennifer leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I wish you could see it, Mom. It has this incredible kitchen with an island, and the master suite has a sitting area that would be perfect for nursing the baby. The backyard is huge. Patricia would have so much room to play. And there's a separate living space over the garage," Michael added casually. "Perfect for extended family visits. You could stay as long as you wanted when you come to visit." Extended family visits. A polite way of saying I could be a guest in their home when they needed something, but never truly welcome to stay. The carrot to go with the stick they'd been wielding since my arrival in California. But knowing what I now knew, their manipulation felt almost comical. "How much help are you looking for?" I asked directly. They exchanged a glance so quick I might have missed it 3 months ago, but homelessness had taught me to read the subtle communications between people who saw me as a problem to be managed. "Well," Jennifer said carefully, "we were hoping for maybe 50,000, 60 at the most, just for the down payment. We'd pay you back, of course, once Michael's next promotion comes through." $60,000, more than I'd had in my bank account in my entire life before Margaret's inheritance. Money they'd calculated I could afford because they'd done the math on my new circumstances without ever asking about my plans for the future. Money they felt entitled to because they believed we shared blood. That's a significant amount, I said. But you have it, Michael said, his tone suggesting this made the decision obvious. And it's family. This is what family does for each other. Family. The word they'd weaponized since my arrival in California, using it to justify their assumption that my inheritance should solve their problems. But we weren't family. Jennifer was the product of adultery and lies, raised by people who'd built their entire lives on deception. Tell me about Patricia, I said, changing the subject. How is she adjusting to the idea of being a big sister? Jennifer's face softened immediately. Oh, she's so excited. She keeps patting my belly and talking to the baby. Yesterday, she told me she wants to teach the baby how to color. For a moment, I saw my daughter as she'd been when Patricia was born. Exhausted but glowing. So proud of her perfect baby girl. Before Michael's promotion became her primary concern, before house hunting consumed her weekends. Before my homelessness became an inconvenience to be managed. But that tenderness felt different now, knowing she wasn't really mine. I miss her, I said quietly. Then come home, Jennifer said immediately. That's what we've been trying to tell you. Patricia needs her grandmother. This new baby will need you, too. You're running away from the people who love you most. Am I? Because when I was sleeping in my car, neither of you seemed to think Patricia needed her grandmother very badly. Michael's jaw tightened. That's not fair, Patricia. We offered you our guest room. For 6 weeks until I became inconvenient. You weren't inconvenient. You were, he paused, clearly searching for diplomatic language. You were going through a difficult time. Sometimes people in crisis need professional help, not just family support. Professional help. As if my homelessness had been a mental health crisis rather than the natural result of losing everything in a flood and having nowhere else to go. As if the real problem hadn't been their unwillingness to help beyond what was convenient for them. I wasn't having a breakdown, Michael. I was having a housing crisis. And now you're not, Jennifer said brightly. So, let's move forward. You have this beautiful inheritance. We have this amazing opportunity with the house. And Patricia has grandparents who want to be part of her life. It all works out perfectly. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment away from their carefully orchestrated presentation. In the mirror, I looked at the woman I'd become, no longer hollow-cheeked and desperate, but not yet entirely sure of her own power. I thought about Margaret and Elena, who'd built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I thought about Carol, who'd chosen to befriend a stranger simply because kindness was her nature. And I thought about the new locks on my doors, the keys that belonged only to me. When I returned to the table, Michael was showing Jennifer something on his phone. Photos of the house they wanted to buy, probably, or mortgage calculators that demonstrated how my money would make their dreams possible. I'd like to see where you're living, Jennifer said as I sat down. Tomorrow before we fly back. Of course, maybe we could stay the night, Michael suggested. Save on the hotel bill, get a real feel for the neighborhood. There it was, the assumption that my home was available to them, that my space could be occupied without permission because we were family and family didn't need to ask. But we weren't family. Not really. I'm sorry, but that won't be possible, I said. Why not? Jennifer's eyebrows drew together in confusion. Is the house not habitable or something? The house is perfectly habitable. I just prefer to keep my own space. But we're your family, Michael said, as if this explained everything. Yes, you are. And you have a hotel room. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. I could see Jennifer processing this refusal, trying to understand how the mother who'd accepted sleeping in a car rather than impose on anyone had suddenly developed boundaries. You're being ridiculous, she said finally. We flew all the way out here to see you, and you won't even let us stay one night in your house. You flew out here to assess my inheritance and convince me to give you money for yours. Michael's face flushed red. That's not we're concerned about you. You're not acting like yourself. You're right, I said. I'm acting like someone who's learned the difference between being wanted and being useful. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Real ones, I thought, though I was no longer certain I could tell the difference. How can you say that? You're my mother. I love you. But she wasn't my daughter. She was the child of a man I'd never met, raised by a sister who'd lied to everyone, including me. The love I felt for her had been built on deception, and now I wondered if her love for me had ever been real or simply a learned response to my usefulness. I know you do. But your love comes with conditions I'm no longer willing to meet. What conditions? What are you talking about? The condition that I be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you're willing to give me. The condition that I not expect too much. Ask for too much. Need too much. The condition that my needs always come second to your convenience. I reached for my purse, pulling out my wallet to pay for dinner. It was a small gesture, but symbolic. I was no longer someone who needed others to pick up the check. I'll drive you back to your hotel, I said. The ride was silent, except for Jennifer's occasional sniffles and Michael's muttered complaints about California traffic. When I pulled up to their hotel entrance, Jennifer turned to me with the expression she'd perfected as a teenager. Part wounded innocence, part manipulative desperation. Mom, please don't let some old woman's house come between us. Don't let money change who we are as a family. Some old woman's house. As if Margaret had been nothing more than a convenient benefactor. As if her carefully preserved home was just a windfall to be liquidated. But Margaret had been family in ways Jennifer never could be. Margaret had understood loyalty, sacrifice, the difference between love and obligation. Money didn't change who we are, Jennifer. It revealed who we've always been. Michael got out of the car without a word, but Jennifer lingered, her hand on the door handle. We'll come by tomorrow morning before our flight, she said. Maybe you'll feel differently after you've had time to think. Maybe, I said, though we both knew I wouldn't. That night, I sat on Margaret's front porch with a cup of tea, watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet. Carol's house was dark. She'd mentioned going to her daughter's for the weekend, but other windows glowed with warm light. Families going about their Sunday evening routines. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. I love you, Mom. I hope you remember that. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, I love you, too. That's why this hurts so much. But I didn't send it. Instead, I pulled out Margaret's letter and read it again by porch light. The truth that changed everything. Jennifer wasn't my daughter. She was the product of betrayal, raised by people who'd built their lives on lies. Every sacrifice I'd made, every sleepless night when she was sick, every proud moment at her graduation, it had all been based on a fiction. The anger that rose in my chest was different now. Sharper. More righteous. I'd been robbed of my real life, tricked into pouring my love into someone else's mistake. And that mistake had grown up to be exactly like her real father, selfish, manipulative, willing to discard people when they became inconvenient. I turned off my phone and went inside, locking my new locks behind me. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, but this time I would be armed with the truth. Jennifer would arrive expecting to manipulate the woman who'd raised her, but instead she would face someone who knew exactly what she was. For the first time since Jennifer's call announcing their visit, I felt ready for that choice. I'd spent months learning to survive on scraps of shelter, of dignity, of love. I'd forgotten that I deserved better until Margaret's inheritance reminded me that some people understand the difference between charity and care, between obligation and genuine affection. In the morning, Jennifer and Michael would arrive expecting the mother and mother-in-law they'd always known, grateful, accommodating, willing to sacrifice for their happiness. Instead, they would meet the woman I was becoming. Someone who understood her own worth. Someone who'd learned that the most radical act of self-love is refusing to accept less than you deserve from people who aren't even really family. The locks were changed. The boundaries were set. The truth was known. Tomorrow, I would discover whether love built on lies could survive the harsh light of reality, or whether some relationships only work when one person holds all the power and the other person doesn't know the game is rigged. I woke before dawn and made coffee in Margaret's kitchen, watching the sky lighten over the San Gabriel Mountains. In a few hours, Jennifer and Michael would arrive for what they undoubtedly expected to be a final negotiation. One last chance to convince the confused old woman to see reason and remember her family obligations. But I wasn't confused. For the first time in months, possibly years, I saw everything with perfect clarity. By 9 o'clock, I was dressed and ready. I'd chosen my clothes with the same care I'd taken the day before. The navy dress that made me look competent and successful, paired with the pearl earrings Margaret had left in her jewelry box. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who belonged in this house, who'd earned her place in this life. A woman who was no longer bound by lies or false obligations. A woman who finally knew the truth about everything. At 9:47, a rental car pulled into my driveway. Jennifer and Michael emerged looking tired and slightly hungover. Too much wine with dinner as they'd planned their strategy, perhaps. Michael carried a briefcase, which struck me as both pathetic and telling. He'd brought documentation to a family visit, papers to support whatever argument they'd rehearsed. I opened the door before they could knock, stepping onto the porch instead of inviting them inside. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "How was your hotel?" "Fine," Jennifer said, her eyes scanning the house behind me as if looking for an opening to slip past my guard. "Can we come in? We don't have much time before our flight." "Actually, I think the porch is perfect for our conversation." Michael's jaw tightened with irritation. "Patricia, it's 40 degrees out here. It's 58 degrees and sunny. Quite pleasant for December." I settled into one of the wicker chairs Margaret had arranged for watching sunsets. After a moment's hesitation, Jennifer and Michael took the remaining chairs, though both looked uncomfortable with this outdoor negotiation. "Mom," Jennifer began, her voice taking on the patient tone she'd probably practiced. "We talked after dinner last night and we want to apologize if we came on too strong about the house thing. We know you're still adjusting to your new situation." My new situation. As if inheriting a beautiful home and financial security was a medical condition that needed managing. As if discovering that my entire relationship with her was built on lies was just another adjustment to make. "I'm adjusting quite well actually." "That's wonderful," Michael said, opening his briefcase with unnecessary flourish. "But we want to make sure you're thinking about the big picture. Long-term planning. You know, at your age, it's important to consider how to maximize your assets." At my age. I was 62, not 92, but in Michael's mind, I was apparently too elderly to make financial decisions without his guidance. The condescension felt different now that I knew Jennifer wasn't really mine to worry about. "What kind of long-term planning did you have in mind?" Michael pulled out a folder thick with papers, printouts of real estate listings, mortgage calculations, investment projections. He'd done his homework. I had to give him that. "Well, for starters, this house is way too big for one person. The maintenance costs alone must be eating into your inheritance, and California taxes." He shook his head as if personally wounded by the state's tax structure. "You could sell this place, buy something smaller and more practical in Ohio, and still have hundreds of thousands left over to help your family build wealth." "Help my family build wealth," I repeated slowly. "Exactly." Jennifer leaned forward eagerly. "It's about creating generational wealth. What's the point of having all this money if it just sits here while your family struggles with mortgages and daycare costs? But they weren't my family. Not Jennifer, not Patricia, not the new baby. They were strangers connected to me only through decades of deception. The realization was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Are you struggling, Jennifer? She blinked, apparently not expecting the direct question. Well, no, not struggling exactly, but with the baby coming and Michael's career trajectory, we need to position ourselves for success. The house we want isn't just about us. It's about creating the right environment for Patricia and the new baby. Good schools, safe neighborhood, room to grow. And you think I should subsidize this positioning? We think you should invest in your grandchildren's future, Michael said smoothly. Instead of rattling around in some dead woman's house playing make-believe about starting over at 62. The silence that followed his words was absolute. Even the morning birds seemed to have paused their singing. Jennifer's face went pale as she realized Michael had crossed a line they'd probably agreed he wouldn't cross. Michael, she said quietly. No, let him finish, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. I'm curious about this make-believe life I'm apparently living. Michael, emboldened by what he mistook for calm acceptance, leaned back in his chair. Look, Patricia, I get it. You've had a rough few months. The flood, the temporary housing situation. It was all very traumatic. But you can't just run away to California and pretend to be someone you're not. You're a grandmother from Ohio, not some California lifestyle woman. This whole thing is just postponing the inevitable return to reality. And what reality is that? That you belong near your family. That your purpose is supporting the next generation, not playing house with someone else's life. There it was. The truth underneath all their careful maneuvering. In Michael's mind, my value was entirely utilitarian. I existed to provide free child care, holiday hosting, and now financial support for their ambitions. The idea that I might have my own dreams, my own right to happiness, was literally inconceivable to him. But now I had a weapon they didn't know about. Margaret's letter burned in my memory like a brand. I looked at Jennifer, who was staring at her hands, unwilling to meet my eyes. She wasn't disagreeing with Michael's assessment. She was just embarrassed that he'd stated it so boldly. But she wasn't my daughter. She had no claim on my sacrifice. You know what's interesting? I said conversationally. 3 months ago, I would have agreed with you. I would have sold this house, moved back to Ohio, and handed you whatever money you asked for. I would have been grateful that you still wanted me in your lives, even after proving how much of a burden I could be. Mom, Jennifer started. But I held up a hand. But then I learned something important. Do you know what it was? Neither of them answered. I learned that some people invite you into their lives and some people just tolerate your presence until it becomes inconvenient. I learned the difference between being loved and being useful. And then I learned something even more important. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Margaret's letter, watching their faces as they realized I was holding something significant. I learned that sometimes the people you think are family aren't family at all. Jennifer's face went white. What are you talking about? I'm talking about this letter from Margaret. Would you like me to read it to you, Jennifer? Or would you prefer to tell Michael yourself about who your real father is? The color drained from Jennifer's face completely. Michael looked confused, glancing between us. What is she talking about, Jen? Jennifer's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what you mean. Charles, I said simply. Your real father's name was Charles. Margaret's husband. The man your mother had an affair with while she was married to the man I thought was your father. Michael's face went slack with shock. Jennifer started to shake. That's impossible, Jennifer whispered. Is it? Because it explains so much, doesn't it? Why you've always been able to discard people so easily when they become inconvenient. Why you could let me sleep in a car for 3 months without losing sleep over it. You inherited your real father's selfishness, his complete inability to consider other people's feelings. Jennifer started to cry, but they weren't the manipulative tears from the restaurant. These were tears of shock and horror. I didn't know, she sobbed. I swear I didn't know. But your mother did. The woman I called sister knew the truth and let me raise another man's child, let me pour 30 years of love and sacrifice into someone who wasn't even mine. Michael finally found his voice. Jesus Christ, Jennifer. Is this true? Jennifer nodded miserably, the fight gone out of her completely. I stood up, smoothing my dress, feeling the solid weight of my house key in my pocket. The key to a home that was truly mine, inherited from someone who'd actually cared about me. So you see, Michael, when you talk about family obligations, you're talking to the wrong person. Jennifer isn't my daughter. Patricia isn't my granddaughter. The new baby won't be my grandchild. You're strangers who've been taking advantage of a woman who thought she owed you something. But you raised me, Jennifer whispered. You were my mother in every way that mattered. Was I? Because when I needed you most, when I was homeless and desperate, you treated me like an inconvenience. When I found stability and happiness, you came here trying to manipulate me into giving you money. Does that sound like the behavior of someone who was raised with love? Or does it sound like someone who learned to take what they wanted without giving anything back? Jennifer's sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. Only a cold, clean anger that burned away years of misplaced guilt and obligation. I want you to leave, I said. Both of you. Catch an earlier flight. Go home to Ohio. Buy whatever house you can afford on Michael's salary. Raise your children without expecting me to subsidize your dreams. What about us? Jennifer asked, her voice small and broken. What happens to us? There is no us. There never was. You're the daughter of a man I never met, raised by a woman who lied to me for 30 years. Any relationship we might have going forward would have to be built from scratch, based on truth instead of deception. And frankly, based on how you've treated me, I don't see much foundation to build on. Michael was gathering his papers, his face red with anger and embarrassment. This is insane. You're destroying a family over some old letter from a dead woman. I'm not destroying anything. I'm revealing what was already destroyed, what was never real in the first place. Jennifer stood up slowly, tears streaming down her face. I loved you, she said. Whatever the biology, I loved you as my mother. No, I said quietly. You loved what I could do for you. When I couldn't do anything anymore, when I needed help instead of providing it, that love disappeared pretty quickly. I walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the neighborhood Margaret and Elena had chosen for their life together. Carol was watering her plants and she waved when she saw me. I waved back, feeling the simple pleasure of being seen and acknowledged by someone who expected nothing from me but friendliness. So what happens now? Michael asked, his voice tight with frustration. Now you go catch your flight home. You buy whatever house you can afford. You raise your children and build your life without expecting me to bankroll it. And you never contact me again unless you're prepared to acknowledge the truth about what happened and offer a genuine apology for how you've treated me. And if we do that? Jennifer asked desperately. Then maybe, someday, we might be able to build something real. But it would be as two adult women who choose to care about each other, not as mother and daughter bound by blood that doesn't actually exist. I turned back to face them one final time. The woman who raised you is gone. She died the moment I read Margaret's letter. In her place is someone who knows her own worth, someone who won't be manipulated or guilt-tripped or made to feel grateful for scraps of attention. If you can love that woman, really love her without expecting anything in return, then maybe we have something to talk about. But if all you want is access to my bank account, then this is goodbye. Jennifer and Michael loaded their luggage into the rental car in silence. Jennifer looked back once as they pulled out of the driveway, her face swollen from crying. Michael stared straight ahead, already planning his next strategy, no doubt. After they disappeared around the corner, I sat back down in Margaret's chair and pulled out my phone. I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, but I deleted them all without reading them. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to a number I'd memorized but never used. Mr. Harrison answered on the second ring. Patricia, how are you settling in? Very well, thank you. I have a question about making changes to my will. There was a brief pause. Of course. What kind of changes? I want to establish a scholarship fund for women over 50 who are starting over after losing everything. And I want to leave the house to someone who will appreciate what Margaret and Elena built here. I can draft something for you. Do you have a beneficiary in mind? I looked over at Carol's house where she was now deadheading roses with the patient care of someone who understood that beautiful things required tending. Yes, I said. I think I do. That evening, I called the book club Carol had mentioned and asked about joining. The woman who answered, Mary Rodriguez, seemed delighted to welcome a new member. We're reading Late Bloomers next month, she said. Stories about women who found their power later in life. You'll fit right in. As the sun set over the San Gabriel Mountains, I sat on my porch with Margaret's copy of the book, reading about women who discovered that the second half of life could be entirely different from the first. The phone was silent. No frantic calls from Jennifer. No guilt-inducing messages about family obligations. The silence felt like freedom. Tomorrow I would start planning the scholarship fund. I would tend to the garden Margaret and Elena had planted. I would host the book club in a living room where my mother's quilt caught the afternoon light. I would live a life of my own choosing, surrounded by people who saw my presence as a gift rather than a burden. And if Jennifer ever learned to love without conditions, without expectations of financial return, without the manipulation that seemed to be her inheritance from her real father, she would be welcome in that life. But if she didn't, I would be just fine without her. The woman who'd slept in a car for 3 months, who believed she owed everything to a daughter who wasn't even hers, was gone. In her place was someone who understood that dignity, once reclaimed, was worth more than any false family's approval. The doors were locked. The will was changed. The truth was known. And I was finally, completely home.